In the quiet town of Yoel, a disappearance that baffled the community for years hides a dark secret beneath a family home. A devoted husband, a missing wife, and a mystery that refuses to fade. What really happened behind closed doors remains a chilling question, waiting to be uncovered. In the quiet coastal town of Yoel, County Cork, Ireland, life moved at a gentle pace. Families strolled along the seaside, neighbors exchanged greetings, and the rhythm of daily life had a steady, familiar beat. Amid this calm lived Richard Satchwell, a British-born truck driver in his early 50s, whose work took him across the UK and Ireland, covering long-haul routes and cross-border deliveries. His wife, Tina Satchwell, a woman in her early 40s, shared this home with him. From the outside, they appeared to be an ordinary couple, a family quietly navigating life, with their routines and responsibilities neatly in place. But behind the closed doors of their home, something far darker was quietly taking shape. Richard's job meant he was often on the road, navigating narrow country roads, busy highways, and industrial depots across 2 countries. He had built a reputation as a reliable driver, known for his commitment to schedules and the safe transport of goods. Meanwhile, Tina maintained the home, blending seamlessly into the fabric of the community. Neighbors described her as polite and friendly, someone who enjoyed a quiet, simple life. At first glance, nothing about their life suggested that it would become the center of a gripping and tragic criminal case that would unfold over years. March of 2017 brought a sudden, alarming disruption. Tina Satchwell did not return home one day, and soon, Richard reported her missing to the authorities. The news shocked the local community, and within days, media outlets in both Ireland and the UK began covering the story. A missing woman, a worried husband, and a town filled with concern formed the narrative that the public eagerly followed. On television and in newspapers, Richard appeared composed, though visibly distressed. He spoke of his love for Tina, his hope that she would return, and his cooperation with the authorities in the ongoing search. His public demeanor painted the picture of a grieving spouse facing a painful, inexplicable absence. Authorities treated Tina's disappearance with urgency. Local police launched search operations, reaching out to neighbors, reviewing CCTV footage, and following leads that ranged from the mundane to the unusual. Missing person posters appeared throughout the town, and appeals were broadcast on regional news. Friends and family joined the search efforts, combing local parks, coastal areas, and other likely locations. Yet, despite exhaustive efforts, no trace of Tina could be found. Every lead ended in a dead end, and weeks turned into months without a breakthrough. The lack of evidence only heightened the mystery and drew more media attention. Richard continued his work during this period, traveling on his trucking routes while making regular appearances in the media. He spoke publicly about his worries, his hope, and his desire to understand what had happened. Interviews were conducted in the UK and Ireland, and the story became a point of public interest. He encouraged anyone with information to come forward and maintained a narrative that Tina's disappearance was a troubling mystery, one that seemed to have no clear explanation. The public largely sympathized with him, seeing a husband who appeared genuinely concerned for his missing wife. Despite the outward appearance of a cooperative and grieving spouse, the investigation faced challenges. Police had to consider every possibility: voluntary disappearance, an accident, or foul play. Each theory was pursued, but the absence of concrete evidence made progress difficult. Tina's disappearance became a complex puzzle, a case that tested the patience and persistence of investigators. The local community, meanwhile, continued to speculate. Friends and neighbors wondered if Tina had left of her own accord or if something more sinister had occurred. Rumors circulated, each adding layers of tension and unease to the case. Months passed and years followed, yet Tina remained missing. Her absence left a void in the lives of those who knew her, and questions about her fate lingered like an unanswered echo. Richard maintained his public persona, a husband seemingly determined to find his missing wife. Every interview, every media appearance, reinforced the story of a man caught in a tragic and bewildering situation. The world saw a concerned spouse, what lay beneath the surface was a reality that would remain hidden for years. The story of Tina's disappearance also highlighted the broader challenges faced by law enforcement in missing person cases. Officers had to navigate incomplete information, uncooperative witnesses, and the limitations of surveillance and forensic technology. Each avenue of investigation required careful scrutiny, and investigators were determined not to overlook any detail. Yet, the more time passed without progress, the more the case seemed to drift into the realm of the unexplainable. Families of missing persons, community members, and the authorities themselves were left grappling with uncertainty, unsure if the answers they sought would ever emerge. During this period, the media played a critical role in keeping the story alive. Coverage of Tina's disappearance included appeals for information, reports on search efforts, and profiles of the couple's life in Youghal. The story drew attention from the UK as well as Ireland, and public interest grew. People empathized with Richard, who remained in the public eye, appearing composed yet clearly affected by the prolonged absence of his wife. It was a careful balancing act, the portrayal of grief and concern, the reality of life continuing, and the ongoing search for a missing woman. As part one of this story comes to a close, the scene is set for the complex years that would follow. Tina Satchwell's disappearance in 2017 created a ripple that affected families, authorities, and a community desperate for answers. Richard Satchwell continued his life on the road, continuing media appearances, and projecting the image of a husband grappling with loss. Yet behind the calm exterior, a hidden narrative was developing, one that would remain invisible to the public eye for years. The first part of this story is not just about a missing woman. It is about the tension between appearance and reality, the patience of law enforcement, and the uncertainty that can shadow even the most ordinary of lives. The mystery of Tina's disappearance would linger, leaving unanswered questions and a community holding its breath, unaware that the truth lay much closer than anyone could have imagined. As the years passed following Tina Satchwell's disappearance in 2017, the case continued to captivate both the local community in Youghal and the broader public across Ireland and the United Kingdom. The absence of any concrete leads kept the mystery alive, and Richard Satchwell remained a constant presence in the media. He appeared in interviews, news segments, and public appeals, presenting the image of a grieving husband determined to find his wife. On the surface, it was a story of patience, hope, and an ongoing search, but beneath that appearance, a very different reality was quietly unfolding. Richard's life during these years was a delicate balance between normalcy and the ongoing public performance of concern. He continued his work as a truck driver, often traveling long distances across the UK and Ireland. On the road, he maintained his professional reputation, delivering goods on time and keeping his routes organized. Meanwhile, he managed the public narrative at home, giving interviews that reinforced the idea of a man desperate for answers. His composed presence in front of cameras, his carefully phrased statements, and the consistent recounting of the events surrounding Tina's disappearance created a believable story that few questioned. Meanwhile, the police continued to pursue every possible lead. Officers revisited witnesses' statements, re-examined the couple's home, and sought to trace Tina's last known movements. They explored theories ranging from voluntary disappearance to foul play, interviewing neighbors, friends, and anyone who might have seen or heard something unusual. Community members were cooperative, and tip lines were active, yet nothing definitive emerged. Each lead seemed to evaporate, leaving investigators increasingly frustrated and the public still searching for answers. Over time, patterns in Richard's behavior began to attract attention from some observers. Friends and neighbors occasionally noted inconsistencies in his stories, but without evidence. These remained suspicions rather than proof. Investigators were cautious, knowing that assumptions alone could not build a case. The story of Tina's disappearance remained firmly in the category of missing person, and law enforcement had to rely on facts and physical evidence rather than speculation. During these years, media coverage played a crucial role in maintaining public awareness. Appeals were broadcast on television, stories were published in newspapers, and documentaries revisiting the case occasionally aired. Each mention of Tina's disappearance brought new tips and renewed public interest. Social media amplified the narrative, as members of the public discussed theories, offered advice, and urged anyone with information to come forward. Despite the attention, Richard continued to be viewed largely as a concerned husband, a man suffering alongside a community desperate for closure. The long duration of the case also highlighted the challenges of missing person investigations. When someone vanishes without clear circumstances, authorities must carefully weigh all possibilities. Officers revisited search areas repeatedly, reviewed historical records, and employed forensic techniques to extract any potential clues. Even small details, such as minor inconsistencies in accounts or overlooked objects in the home, were scrutinized. Investigators understood that in cases like this, time could work both for and against them. Evidence could be lost or concealed, but careful attention to overlooked details could eventually reveal the truth. As time went on, Richard's interactions with the media and his community became routine. He maintained his image as a husband consumed by worry, while continuing to travel for work. Public appearances often included messages of hope and appeals for any information about Tina. Local events and charity efforts occasionally referenced her disappearance, keeping her story in the public consciousness. At the same time, police quietly continued their investigations, following leads that did not generate headlines, but were critical to building a factual record. The story's tension grew not just from the ongoing absence of Tina, but from the sense that something about the case was unusual. Law enforcement periodically revisited the home, searching for overlooked evidence and conducting detailed forensic sweeps. Technology improved over the years, allowing investigators to reanalyze digital records, CCTV footage, and phone activity in ways that were not possible in 2017. Each revisit to the case brought new hope, but also new frustration when nothing tangible was uncovered. The lack of closure kept the public and authorities on edge, fostering an atmosphere of anticipation for a breakthrough that had yet to come. During this time, various theories circulated. Some speculated that Tina had left voluntarily, while others suspected an accident or criminal involvement by a third party. Investigators considered each scenario, carefully comparing witness statements and available evidence. While some members of the public began to question Richard's narrative, he remained largely above suspicion, bolstered by his consistent public persona. Even those closest to the case were unable to identify concrete proof that contradicted his story. Despite the outward appearance of normalcy, investigators never stopped probing the couple's home. They reviewed renovations, architectural plans, and storage areas that might conceal evidence. Attention to detail was paramount. Hidden spaces, alterations to furniture, and even minor discrepancies in the home's layout were examined. These inspections, though initially unfruitful, would later prove crucial in uncovering the truth. Meanwhile, Richard continued to manage his image carefully, ensuring that no behavior raised alarm while maintaining the facade of grief and concern. By 2022, 6 years had passed since Tina's disappearance. Public interest had waned somewhat, but the story remained in local memory, and periodic media updates reminded the community that the case was still active. Investigators persisted quietly, knowing that the resolution of the case depended on patience, observation, and the eventual discovery of evidence. The tension was palpable. A missing woman, a grieving husband, and years of unanswered questions created a narrative that felt both ordinary and deeply unsettling. As Part 2 draws to a close, the foundation is laid for the dramatic developments that would follow. The careful work of investigators, the long-standing public fascination, and the meticulous behavior of Richard Satchwell all converged toward a moment that would finally reveal the hidden truth. The story up to this point is one of patience, suspicion, and the quiet persistence of those seeking answers. Tina's disappearance remained a mystery, the investigation an ongoing effort, and the community held in suspense, unaware that the truth lay concealed in plain sight within the home they thought they knew. The stage is set for Part 3, where years of meticulous investigation and careful observation would culminate in the discovery that finally unraveled the narrative Richard had maintained for so long. The tension between appearance and reality, hope and despair, would reach its breaking point, exposing a story far darker than anyone had imagined. After 6 long years of uncertainty, public speculation, and tireless investigation, the story of Tina Satchwell reached a shocking turning point in 2023. What had begun as a mysterious disappearance in 2017 finally transformed into a confirmed and tragic reality. Authorities discovered the remains of Tina Satchwell concealed under the stairs of the family home in Yoel. The discovery sent shockwaves through the community, the media, and the nation. For years, Richard Satchwell had presented himself as a grieving husband, appealing to the public for help in finding his missing wife. Behind closed doors, however, a dark secret had remained hidden, a truth that now came to light in the most disturbing way. Police immediately secured the home for forensic examination. Every inch of the area around the stairs, the surrounding rooms, and the household environment was meticulously investigated. Specialists documented the hidden spaces, examined the floorboards, and collected physical evidence to reconstruct the timeline of events. What became clear was that Tina had been murdered in her own home and concealed deliberately. Investigators concluded that Richard Satchwell had strangled her and then hidden her body, maintaining an elaborate facade of concern and despair for years to mislead authorities and the public. The careful planning and concealment shocked those who had followed the story for so long. The forensic evidence was crucial. Experts analyzed the remains, confirming the cause of death and the circumstances under which the crime had been committed. Every detail of the home was scrutinized. Alterations to furniture, hidden compartments, and signs of disturbance beneath the floorboards provided critical confirmation of foul play. The findings shattered the narrative Richard had maintained publicly and transformed a long-running missing person case into a murder investigation. As the investigation progressed, the media and the public followed the unfolding details with intense interest. For years, many had sympathized with Richard, seeing him as a husband desperate to find his wife. The revelation of his culpability sent shockwaves of disbelief. Friends, neighbors, and the wider community struggled to reconcile the image they had of a concerned spouse with the grim reality of the murder. The case became an example of how appearances can be deceiving, how carefully constructed narratives can mask horrific actions, and how persistent investigation is essential to uncover the truth. In the months following the discovery, Richard Satchwell was formally charged with murder. Court proceedings began, and evidence from the home, forensic analysis, and witness testimony was presented to establish the full scope of his actions. The prosecution argued that the murder was deliberate, that the body had been hidden intentionally, and that the false narrative of a missing wife had been maintained to obstruct justice. Each piece of evidence painted a clear picture of premeditation, planning, and sustained deception. During the trial, the contrast between Richard's public persona and the reality revealed by investigators was highlighted repeatedly. The prosecution carefully outlined how he had continued to appear in media interviews, maintain his trucking work, and engage with the community, all while concealing his crime. This deliberate manipulation of perception was central to understanding the case and the severity of his actions. Witnesses testified about his behavior, while forensic experts explained the methods used to hide the remains and the timeline of events leading to Tina's death. Media coverage of the trial captured the public's attention. The story that had once been framed as a tragic disappearance evolved into a cautionary tale of deception and betrayal. The public learned not only about the grim facts of the case, but also about the investigative work that uncovered the truth after years of uncertainty. Law enforcement emphasized the importance of persistence, attention to detail, and careful examination of every lead, demonstrating that even complex cases with long delays could ultimately be resolved. After careful consideration of all evidence, in 2025, the court reached its verdict. Richard Satchwell was found guilty of the murder of his wife, Tina. The sentencing phase concluded with a life imprisonment sentence, reflecting both the severity of the crime and the years of calculated deception that had followed. For Tina's family, friends, and the community, the verdict brought a measure of closure after years of unanswered questions and distress. It confirmed what investigators had worked to establish, that the disappearance had not been accidental or voluntary, but the result of a deliberate and heinous act. The case of Richard and Tina Satchwell serves as a stark example of the complex interplay between appearances, public perception, and hidden realities. It underscores the capacity for individuals to maintain a facade for extended periods, manipulate public empathy, and evade suspicion. Simultaneously, it illustrates the diligence of law enforcement in pursuing the truth, even when the evidence is elusive and time has passed. The narrative demonstrates how forensic science, careful investigation, and persistence can ultimately bring justice, no matter how long it takes. Reflecting on the events from 2017 to 2025, several key lessons emerge. The story emphasizes the importance of vigilance, the need for thorough investigation in missing person cases, and the recognition that not everything presented at face value reflects reality. It also highlights the emotional toll on families, communities, and investigators, who invest years seeking resolution while navigating uncertainty and public attention. Tina Satchwell's story is both tragic and instructive. It is a reminder that justice may be delayed, but thorough, careful, and persistent efforts can eventually reveal the truth. The final chapter of this case closes with the recognition of both loss and accountability. Tina's death was a profound tragedy, and the years of deception compounded the emotional and social impact. Richard Satchwell's conviction and life sentence stand as a testament to the work of investigators and the judicial system, ensuring that, despite attempts to obscure reality, justice prevailed. The story concludes not with speculation, but with resolution. The truth unveiled, the perpetrator held responsible, and the narrative of disappearance replaced by a documented account of murder, investigation, and legal accountability. In conclusion, the saga of Richard and Tina Satchwell is a chilling reminder of how easily appearances can mislead and how determined investigation can penetrate even the most carefully constructed deception. It is a narrative of mystery, prolonged uncertainty, and ultimate justice. A story that began with the disappearance of a woman, spanned years of unanswered questions, and ended with the revelation of a crime that had been hidden in plain sight. For the community of Yoel, for investigators, and for the public who followed the case, it remains a powerful example of the pursuit of truth and the importance of never taking appearances at face value. In a quiet Houston neighborhood, a husband's suspicion turned into obsession, and a hidden camera captured a secret that would destroy everything. What began as love soon spiraled into betrayal, rage, and murder. This is the story of how one man's search for truth became his path to ruin. In the quiet suburbs of Houston, Texas, a man named Jordy Hussein Soljanovic built a life defined by long miles, open roads, and hard work. At 45, Jordy was a seasoned long-haul truck driver, known among his co-workers as reliable and disciplined. He spent most weeks behind the wheel, hauling cargo across states, and returning home only for short breaks. Life on the road was his normal, but home was his comfort, a modest house where his wife, Adriana Perez, and their teenage son, Mateo, waited. Adriana, 38, worked part-time at a local beauty salon. She was friendly, social, and always well-groomed, a woman who loved conversation and attention. While Jordy lived a quiet, routine life centered around work, Adriana longed for excitement and companionship. Their son Mateo, around 16, was bright and respectful, occasionally helping his father load or check the truck before long journeys. To outsiders, the Soljanovic family looked like a stable, hard-working household living the American dream. But inside, small cracks had begun to appear, cracks that would soon split open into something no one could have imagined. Jordy's profession often kept him away from home for days or even weeks. His long absences meant Adriana had plenty of time to herself. Though Jordy trusted her deeply, there were moments when he couldn't shake a faint unease, small signs that something felt different. Missed calls, brief answers, and her growing disinterest in their conversations made him suspicious, though he didn't want to believe it. Still, he decided to take one small precaution. A few months before everything fell apart, he had installed hidden cameras around his home, mostly for security, he told himself. But deep down, perhaps part of him already feared what he might one day see. Those cameras became his silent witnesses. Whenever Geordie stopped for the night during his routes, he would occasionally check the live feed on his phone, mostly to make sure the house was safe and his family was okay. For a long time, everything seemed normal. He saw Adriana watching television, cooking, or talking on the phone. But one ordinary evening, as he rested in his truck cab somewhere along the Louisiana-Texas border, that sense of normalcy vanished forever. Geordie opened the app, expecting to see the same quiet living room. Instead, he saw movement in the hallway leading to their bedroom. The feed from the master bedroom camera came to life, and what he saw next froze him completely. Adriana wasn't alone. A man he recognized, Omar Santamaria Ruiz, a 35-year-old construction worker who lived nearby and sometimes helped with house repairs, was there with her. What unfolded on that small screen confirmed Geordie's worst fears. His wife was having an affair. For several minutes, Geordie just sat in silence. The noise of distant trucks and highway sounds faded as his thoughts raced. Disbelief turned into heartbreak, and heartbreak quickly transformed into something darker, fury. The hidden camera, meant to give him peace of mind, had instead torn his life apart in an instant. As he replayed what he had seen, a storm brewed inside him. Every mile he had driven, every night he had spent away, every effort he had made for his family suddenly felt meaningless. In that moment, Geordie made a decision that would seal his fate. He started the truck engine and turned the wheel back toward Houston. The journey that usually took him hours felt like a blur of anger and determination. He didn't call anyone. He didn't stop to rest. The only thing on his mind was confronting the betrayal he had just witnessed. Back in Houston, the city slept as Geordie's truck rolled quietly through familiar streets. It was early morning when he parked outside his home. He sat behind the wheel for a moment, breathing heavily, trying to calm the rage building inside. But every time he closed his eyes, he saw the same image. His wife with another man in the room they once shared. His hands trembled as he unlocked the door. Inside, the house was still. The hallway lights were dim, and the soft hum of the refrigerator was the only sound. Geordie's footsteps were slow but firm as he moved toward the bedroom. The door was closed. From behind it, faint voices and laughter filtered through. He reached for the handle, his heart pounding. In his jacket pocket was the handgun he legally owned, something he carried occasionally for safety during long hauls. That morning, it became something else entirely. When the door swung open, the shock and fear on Adriana's face said everything. Omar froze. The room fell into silence. Geordie's voice trembled with anger and pain. Words were exchanged, sharp and emotional, accusations, denials, and desperate pleas. But the weight of betrayal had already taken control of him. In that small bedroom, years of trust and love shattered in seconds. The next few moments were chaos, a blur of shouting, movement, and irreversible action. When it was over, the room was quiet again, but nothing would ever be the same. Geordie stood motionless, realizing what he had done. Adriana and Omar lay still. The reality hit him like a wave, and panic set in. The man who once prided himself on discipline and logic had just destroyed his world in an explosion of rage. As the morning light crept through the curtains, Geordie began to think, not clearly, but instinctively. He knew what had happened could never be undone, and that if he didn't act fast, everything would be discovered. His years on the road had taught him how to plan, how to stay calm under pressure. Now, he would use that same discipline to hide what he had done. He locked the bedroom door and sat in the living room, his mind racing. When his teenage son Mateo woke up later that morning, he found his father strangely quiet. Geordie told him there had been a problem and that he needed his help with something urgent involving the truck. Confused but obedient, Mateo followed his father's lead, unaware of the dark truth behind his request. Geordie began to gather supplies, heavy plastic sheets, duct tape, and gloves, materials he often carried for securing loads. He moved carefully, keeping his emotions buried, trying to think like a driver, not a husband. He covered the bedroom window, and began preparing to remove the evidence of what had happened. Mateo helped carry what he thought were just heavy packages, asking few questions, trusting his father as always. Outside, the neighborhood remained silent. No one saw the two of them working. The sun climbed higher, and the truck's trailer door opened, waiting for its next load, not of cargo, but of a secret that would soon stretch across state lines. By that afternoon, Jordy had set his plan into motion. With his truck ready and his son by his side, he began the long drive away from Houston, this time carrying something far heavier than freight. The open road stretched ahead, endless and empty, while behind him lay the house that had witnessed a love destroyed by betrayal and rage. He drove on, leaving behind not just the city, but the man he used to be. Part one of his story ended with silence, the silence of a father, a husband, and now a man who had crossed a line he could never return from. The hum of the truck engine echoed through the long stretches of highway as Jordy Hussein Suljanovic drove east, his eyes fixed on the road, his thoughts spiraling between disbelief and panic. The sun was setting behind him, washing the Texas sky in streaks of orange and red, a haunting reflection of the chaos he had left behind in Houston. Inside the cab, his teenage son Mateo sat silently in the passenger seat, confused and uneasy. He could sense something was terribly wrong, but his father's cold silence kept him from asking questions. Jordy's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly. Every mile took him further from the house where his life had fallen apart. The plan forming in his head wasn't clear, but it was driven by instinct, the same focus he used to handle long hauls and tight delivery schedules. Only this time, he wasn't carrying freight. He was carrying the weight of 2 lives lost, wrapped carefully in plastic, and hidden in the back of his trailer. As the miles passed, the father and son exchanged few words. Jordy told Mateo that there had been an accident, and that they needed to move some things before anyone came asking questions. Mateo, young and scared, trusted his father too much to argue. He had seen the tension in his parents' marriage, the occasional arguments, the distance between them. But he never imagined the situation had turned this dark. All he knew now was that his father was in charge, and questioning him didn't feel safe. When night fell, Jordy pulled into a secluded truck stop near the Texas-Louisiana border. It was a familiar stop, a place where he'd refueled countless times during his long routes. But tonight, he wasn't thinking about refueling or rest. He parked the truck in a shadowed corner, away from the lights and security cameras, and cut the engine. The stillness was heavy. He turned to his son, speaking in a low, controlled tone. "I need you to stay in the truck, Mateo. Don't get out. Don't ask questions. Just trust me." The boy nodded, fear tightening his chest. As Jordy stepped out, the sound of gravel under his boots echoed in the empty lot. He walked to the back of the trailer, checked the locks, and made sure nothing had shifted inside. His expression didn't show emotion. It was the face of a man running on pure determination or denial. For several hours, Jordy sat alone at the edge of the truck stop, staring into the dark woods beyond the lot. He was trying to decide what to do next. The logical part of him knew the truth couldn't stay hidden forever. But another part, the part consumed by shock, convinced him that if he could just make the bodies disappear, maybe everything else would fade with them. That irrational hope pushed him forward. Before dawn, he started the truck again. The road signs began to change as they crossed into Louisiana, moving deeper into rural highways and empty fields. Jordy had driven these roads many times before, delivering loads to small towns and construction sites. He knew where the traffic thinned, where the land turned wild, and where no one would look. That knowledge became the foundation of his plan. By mid-morning, they reached an isolated area off a service road surrounded by thick woods. Jordy stopped the truck on a dirt path, far from any houses or cameras. The air was still and damp, filled with the distant buzz of insects. He told Mateo to stay inside once again, but this time the boy hesitated. Something inside him wanted to know the truth. "Dad, what are we doing here?" he asked quietly. Jordy looked at him, eyes hollow, and said only, "Taking care of what has to be done." When Jordy climbed into the trailer, the full reality of his actions returned. The weight of what lay there was unbearable, not just physically, but emotionally. Each movement felt heavy, deliberate, final. He worked in silence, using ropes and tarps to move the remains, keeping his breathing steady as he loaded them onto a small dolly. There were no tears, now only grim focus. He made several trips into the woods, each time walking deeper into the trees until he found places hidden by brush and roots. The disposal took hours. By the time he was done, the sun was high, and the Louisiana heat pressed down like punishment. Jordy stood still for a long time, staring at the ground. He whispered something no one could hear, perhaps a prayer, perhaps an apology, and then turned back toward the truck. When he climbed inside, Mateo could see the exhaustion in his father's face. Sweat dripped from his brow, his shirt clung to his back, but his eyes were cold and distant. "We're going home," he said simply, and started the engine again. The drive back to Houston was silent. Mateo didn't know what to say, and Jordy didn't want to speak. Each passing town, each familiar sign, only reminded him of what he had done. When they reached the city limits, Jordy told his son to go inside and take a shower, to act normal if anyone asked questions. Mateo nodded, though the confusion in his mind had now turned to quiet fear. He didn't fully understand, but he could feel the heaviness in the air. Something irreversible had happened. That night, Jordy sat alone in the kitchen, staring at the table. The house was quiet, eerily so. The sounds of Adriana's voice, her laughter, her presence, all gone. In their place was silence that echoed louder than any noise. He looked around the house, every room filled with memories that now felt poisoned. In the days that followed, Jordy tried to resume a routine. He washed his truck, cleaned the house, and pretended life was normal. But the disappearance of Adriana Perez and Omar Santamaria Ruiz couldn't go unnoticed for long. Adriana's co-workers were the first to raise concern when she didn't show up for work or answer her phone. Calls went unanswered. Messages stayed unread. Friends began visiting the house, asking questions. Jordy gave short, calm replies, saying Adriana had gone to visit a relative or needed some time alone. His composed demeanor fooled some, but not all. Within a week, police filed a missing persons report for both Adriana and Omar. Investigators started tracing their last known movements, interviewing friends and neighbors. Some neighbors mentioned seeing Jordy's truck leaving unusually early that week. Others spoke about the arguments they occasionally heard between the couple. The pieces were small, but they were beginning to form a picture. Back at the station, detectives reviewed the timeline. 2 adults missing on the same day, connected through a personal relationship, and a husband with access to an 18-wheeler. It didn't take long for suspicion to form. They reached out to Jordy for questioning. He appeared calm and cooperative, claiming he had last seen Adriana a few days earlier before he left for a route. But his calmness couldn't hide the inconsistencies in his story. When police obtained a warrant to search his home, they discovered faint traces of blood in the master bedroom, partially cleaned but not gone. Forensic teams moved in, collecting samples and photographing every corner. Meanwhile, detectives checked highway surveillance footage and gas station logs. Jordy's truck appeared multiple times along the route between Houston and rural Louisiana, a route that matched his delivery history, but not his current assignments. Within days, authorities were convinced that this was more than a disappearance. It was something far more serious. The search widened to include wooded areas along the Louisiana border. Dogs, drones, and local deputies joined in. The pressure began closing in on Jordy, even as he tried to maintain his composure at home. At night, Mateo could hear his father pacing, restless and agitated. The man who once guided him through homework and shared stories from a road was now distant, haunted. Mateo wanted to ask what really happened, but the fear of hearing the answer kept him silent. As investigators zeroed in on the Louisiana sites, Jordy's world was rapidly collapsing. His carefully planned secrecy was unraveling with every new discovery. The trail of tire marks, GPS data, and the unshakable evidence inside his own home were pointing straight at him. The illusion of control he had tried to build was slipping fast, and soon, every truth he had tried to bury would surface. The story of a betrayed husband was about to turn into a nationwide manhunt, one that would expose not only the crime, but the hidden rage that drove him to commit it. The silence of the open road was ending, replaced by the sound of sirens closing in. Days turned into weeks, as the search for Adriana Perez and Omar Santamaria Ruiz intensified. What had started as a missing persons case was now drawing the attention of multiple law enforcement agencies. Detectives from Houston worked alongside Louisiana authorities, piecing together fragments of evidence that slowly began to point in one direction, toward the quiet, soft-spoken truck driver who claimed to know nothing. Jordi Hussein Suljanovic's name was becoming impossible to ignore. The first breakthrough came when investigators obtained a detailed GPS history of Jordi's 18-wheeler. Though he insisted he hadn't been near Louisiana during the time of Adriana's disappearance, the digital data told another story. His truck had crossed the Texas-Louisiana border just hours after Adriana was last seen alive. Not only that, but his stops aligned almost perfectly with areas of remote woodland near abandoned service roads. Detectives now had a map, a silent witness that told them where to look. A week later, a search team combing through a wooded stretch near Lafayette, Louisiana, stumbled upon something unusual, a plastic sheet partially buried under leaves. The smell was faint but undeniable. As the team carefully unearthed the area, what they found confirmed their fears. Human remains, wrapped and concealed, bearing clear signs of deliberate disposal. A mile away, another discovery was made, the second body, similarly hidden. Both were later identified as Adriana Perez and Omar Santamaria Ruiz. The scene was grim, but investigators worked carefully, preserving every detail. Near one of the dump sites, tire impressions were found, consistent with the type used on long-haul trucks. A distinct tread pattern helped them narrow the make and model, a match to the truck Jordi drove. Within hours, the case shifted from investigation to pursuit. A warrant for Jordi Suljanovic's arrest was issued for double homicide and unlawful disposal of human remains. When police arrived at his Houston home, Jordi was sitting in his kitchen, silent and expressionless. He didn't resist arrest. Mateo, standing in the corner, watched as officers handcuffed his father and led him outside. Neighbors gathered quietly, whispering as the man they'd known for years, polite, hardworking, devoted to his family, was taken away under flashing red and blue lights. For Mateo, the moment was shattering. The truth he had avoided confronting was now undeniable. At the police station, Jordi was calm. During questioning, he initially denied any involvement. He said he'd been on a delivery route and had no idea where his wife had gone. But investigators had built a strong case. They presented photos of the tire tracks, the GPS data, and forensic reports from his home, including traces of blood in the bedroom, partially cleaned, but matching Adriana's DNA. The evidence was overwhelming. After hours of silence, Jordi asked for water. He sat quietly for a few moments, then looked at the lead detective and said, "You already know what happened." What followed was a quiet, emotionless confession. He admitted that he had installed hidden cameras in the house months earlier, that he'd seen his wife with another man, and that something inside him had snapped. He described the confrontation, the anger, the moment he pulled the trigger, and the hours afterward. He told them how he used his truck to move the bodies, and how his son unknowingly helped, not understanding what was inside the plastic. Jordi's confession was detailed, consistent, and devastating. He didn't try to justify himself. He didn't ask for sympathy. He spoke like a man recounting something inevitable, as if, in his mind, the moment he saw that camera footage, his fate had already been sealed. "I didn't plan to kill her," he said quietly. "I just couldn't stand to see it. I lost control." His words became the centerpiece of the prosecution's case. In the weeks that followed, the story of the hidden cam fury dominated local headlines. Reporters covered every angle, the betrayal, the secret surveillance, and the violent outburst that followed. For many, it was a tragic story of how technology, meant to bring peace of mind, had instead exposed a truth that led to death. The trial took place in Houston nearly a year later. The courtroom was filled with journalists, family members, and curious onlookers. Jordi sat quietly beside his attorney, hands folded, eyes fixed on the floor. The prosecution painted him as a man driven by rage and control, someone who could not handle betrayal and chose to take justice into his own hands. They presented the hidden camera footage that started it all, his GPS trail, and the forensic findings from the crime scene. On the other side, the defense attempted to argue that Jordy's actions were a moment of emotional breakdown, a temporary loss of sanity triggered by shock. They emphasized his clean record, his years of hard work, and his devotion to his family. But even they couldn't deny the facts. The evidence was irrefutable. 2 people were dead, and the method of concealment showed calculation beyond impulse. Throughout the trial, Mateo remained one of the most tragic figures. He testified briefly, describing how his father had asked him for help that morning, how he didn't know what he was really helping with, and how he later realized the truth. His voice broke as he said, "I thought he was the strongest person I knew. I didn't think he could ever do something like that." The jury deliberated for less than a day. When the verdict was read, the courtroom fell silent. Jordy Hussein Suljonovic was found guilty on all counts, 2 charges of capital murder and interstate transportation of human remains. His sentence: life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. He showed little reaction as the decision was announced, only lowering his head as if acknowledging what he had known all along. After the sentencing, reporters described the case as one of the most chilling examples of domestic betrayal turned deadly, not because of its brutality, but because of its ordinariness. It wasn't planned, it wasn't orchestrated. It was a sudden collapse of emotion and morality inside a man who had once seemed ordinary. A husband who turned into a killer in a single moment of rage, and a father who dragged his son into the aftermath. In the years that followed, the story remained a cautionary tale, a reminder of how fragile the line can be between reason and fury. Experts spoke about the psychological impact of betrayal, the dangers of hidden surveillance, and the growing role of technology in domestic life. The idea that a simple camera meant to protect could ignite such destruction fascinated and horrified the public in equal measure. Mateo, now living with relatives, stayed out of the spotlight. Those who knew him said he rarely spoke about what happened. His father, now serving his life sentence in a Texas state prison, kept mostly to himself. Guards described him as quiet, polite, and withdrawn. He worked in the prison workshop and attended religious programs, speaking little to anyone. Some inmates called him the trucker who couldn't forgive. For those who followed the case, the ending felt both tragic and inevitable. It was a story of love turned toxic, of trust shattered, and of technology revealing a truth too painful to face. The open road that had once symbolized Jordy's freedom became the very path that led him to ruin. As one investigator later said in a documentary interview, it all started with a camera, a single act of curiosity that uncovered a secret and ended in 2 deaths. It wasn't just a crime of passion. It was a crime of obsession, of control, and of a man who couldn't walk away from what he saw. The story of Jordy Hussein Suljonovic, the long-haul trucker who watched his life unravel through a hidden lens, remains one of Houston's most unforgettable cases. It's a chilling reflection of how love, jealousy, and technology can collide, turning an ordinary home into the scene of a tragedy that no one saw coming. In the end, the man who spent his life traveling endless highways found himself on a road that would never lead home again. A loving wife disappears from her quiet North Carolina home. Her husband claims she simply walked away, but detectives soon uncover a trail of lies, money, and fear. Behind the walls of a perfect marriage hides a chilling truth that will expose obsession, greed, and a deadly secret. It started like many missing person cases do, quiet, uncertain, and filled with questions no one could yet answer. On a mild March morning in 2019, in Nash County, North Carolina, co-workers of 38-year-old nurse Diana Alejandra Keel grew concerned when she didn't show up for her shift. She was known to be punctual, responsible, and deeply dedicated to her patients. When hours passed without a call or text, that concern turned into alarm. By afternoon, her supervisor reached out to her family, and soon after, police were notified. Within hours, what began as a welfare check would spiral into one of the county's most unsettling cases in years. At the center of the mystery stood Rexford Lynn Keel Jr., a 57-year-old local truck driver. To most people around town, Lynn, as he was known, appeared to be an average Southern man, quiet, hardworking, and sometimes reserved. He and Diana lived in a modest home on Old County Home Road, surrounded by open fields and quiet neighbors. But those who knew the couple closely sensed that something beneath the surface wasn't right. Friends had heard Diana speak about arguments, about feeling controlled, and about wanting a new start. When deputies arrived at the Keel residence after Diana's co-workers reported her missing, Lynn answered the door calmly. He told them that his wife had left the house a few days earlier, after a disagreement, and had never returned. According to him, she sometimes went away for short trips when she needed space. He seemed unconcerned, even casual, about her absence. Officers made a note of his demeanor, but, at that stage, had little reason to assume foul play. As the hours turned into days, the situation grew stranger. Diana's car was still at the house. Her phone, clothes, and purse were inside. Friends and co-workers said she would never vanish without contacting her children, who were staying with relatives at the time. Something was deeply wrong. Detectives revisited Lynn Keel for a second interview, and his story didn't quite line up with the timeline others described. He insisted she had left voluntarily, but there were no signs she had packed or planned to go anywhere. While investigators were trying to trace Diana's movements, they uncovered something that made them pause. More than a decade earlier, Lynn's first wife, Elizabeth Broomkeel, had died under mysterious circumstances in 2006. Her death had been ruled accidental, a fall at home. But now, with another wife suddenly missing, that old case seemed worth another look. The coincidence was too striking to ignore. Meanwhile, the search for Diana intensified. Flyers were printed, volunteers joined the effort, and local media began covering the story. Friends described her as joyful, compassionate, and family-oriented. Someone who would never willingly disappear. Her church community held gatherings, praying for her safe return. But beneath the hope, there was growing fear that this was no ordinary disappearance. By March 12th, just days after she was last seen, that fear was confirmed. A highway maintenance crew working in nearby Edgecombe County, about 30 miles from the Keel home, discovered a large tarp on a rural roadside. Inside was the body of a woman. The area was isolated, surrounded by trees and farmland, far from passing eyes. Detectives rushed to the scene. The medical examiner later confirmed what many already feared. It was Diana Alejandra Keel. She had been beaten and left for dead, wrapped in plastic and tarp before being dumped. The brutality of it shocked investigators. When police brought the news to the Keel residence, Lynn was gone. Sometime between the last welfare check and the discovery of the body, he had fled. His pickup truck was missing, and so were several of his personal items. It was clear he wasn't planning to come back. Authorities immediately issued a nationwide alert. The search spread across state lines, and federal agencies joined in, tracking his movements through surveillance footage and highway toll data. Within 24 hours, investigators traced his phone to Tucson, Arizona, hundreds of miles away. The route pointed in one direction, toward the Mexican border. Officers believed he was attempting to escape the country. His flight confirmed what detectives had begun to suspect all along. Lynn Keel was no distraught husband searching for his missing wife. He was the prime suspect in her murder. As the manhunt intensified, details about the couple's relationship began to emerge publicly. Friends told detectives that Diana had often spoken about leaving Lynn. She was described as kind but increasingly fearful in recent months. Some recalled seeing bruises or hearing about arguments that turned heated. One friend mentioned that Diana had confided about having plans to move out, possibly within weeks. That revelation gave investigators a new theory. Perhaps her decision to leave and the control Lynn was about to lose became the breaking point. Behind the scenes, police also uncovered another layer to the case: money. Records showed that Lynn had taken out over $1 million in life insurance policies in Diana's name. It was a staggering sum for a working-class couple. To detectives, this financial motive fit perfectly with a growing pattern of control and possible premeditation. But even with mounting evidence, Lynn was still on the run. Authorities issued press releases urging the public to stay alert and report any sightings of his vehicle, a red pickup truck that had been seen in multiple states along the southern route. News outlets picked up the story nationally, describing it as a case of a missing wife-turned-murder mystery. Days later, law enforcement finally received a break. Border Patrol agents in Arizona spotted a truck matching the description parked near a remote stretch of road outside Tucson. When officers approached, they found Lynn alone. He didn't resist arrest. He was taken into custody and extradited back to North Carolina to face charges of first-degree murder. As he was brought back under heavy escort, the quiet roads of Nash County filled again with reporters and flashing lights. Neighbors watched from a distance, stunned that the man they had waved to at the mailbox now stood accused of such a horrific act. For Diana's family, it was a moment of heartbreak and partial closure. They finally had answers, but none that could ease the loss. With Lynn now in custody, investigators began piecing together the full timeline. Evidence recovered from the home suggested the murder had occurred inside the house days before Diana was reported missing. There were traces that indicated cleanup, and items matching the tarp found around her body were discovered in a nearby shed. Cell phone data placed Lynn in the area where her remains were found. Everything pointed toward a carefully concealed but ultimately flawed cover-up. In the following weeks, police revisited his first wife's 2006 case, comparing similarities in circumstances. While there wasn't enough to reopen that old file formally, the connection was undeniable. Two wives, both under Lynn's control, both gone under suspicious conditions. For many, the pattern spoke louder than any confession could. By the end of March 2019, the once ordinary home on Old County Home Road stood empty, its doors sealed as a crime scene. The flowers neighbors had left for Diana wilted slowly in the spring sun. Inside police headquarters, detectives prepared to take the next step, building the case that would ensure Rexford Lynn Keel Jr. face justice. And while the world now knew what had happened to Diana, the deeper questions, why it happened and how long it had been building, were only beginning to surface. When Rexford Lynn Keel Jr. was finally brought back to North Carolina in police custody, the small community of Nash County was flooded with disbelief. Cameras flashed as deputies led him, handcuffed and expressionless, into the county jail. To outsiders, he looked like an ordinary man. Graying hair, a tired face, and the quiet posture of someone used to long hours on the road. But behind that ordinary image was a husband accused of murdering his wife, wrapping her body in a tarp, and leaving her along a desolate rural highway. What followed was a detailed, patient investigation that would expose a long pattern of control, money schemes, and manipulation hidden beneath years of calm appearances. Detectives began reconstructing the final days of Diana Alejandra Keel's life. Cell phone records, surveillance footage, and testimony from co-workers painted a timeline that revealed her growing unease. In the weeks before her death, Diana had confided to a few friends that she wanted to leave her husband. She had said she couldn't handle his temper or his constant need to control her actions. One friend remembered her saying, "He watches everything I do." These quiet warnings would soon become chilling evidence. Investigators discovered that Diana had recently contacted a real estate agent. She had been looking for an apartment closer to her workplace, suggesting she was preparing for a fresh start. There were also messages on her phone indicating she was speaking with a divorce attorney. For detectives, this was a major clue. Diana was planning to leave, and Lynn knew it. In many domestic homicide cases, that decision to walk away is often the trigger that sets off a violent chain of events. Inside the Keel residence, forensic teams searched every inch of the property. They found signs of cleanup, faint traces of blood on the kitchen floor, small fibers from a tarp in the shed, and a few personal items that seemed oddly displaced. Neighbors had told police that in the days after Diana was last seen, they noticed Lynn burning something in a barrel behind the house. When asked, he told them he was getting rid of trash. That statement now took on a sinister tone. Meanwhile, the autopsy confirmed that Diana's death was the result of blunt force trauma. She had suffered repeated blows, strong enough to cause fatal injuries. The evidence ruled out any claim of an accident. It was a deliberate act of violence. Detectives also matched the plastic she was wrapped in with a roll found on the Keel property. Piece by piece, the story of what happened in that house was coming together. While investigators focused on physical evidence, others were digging into Lynn's background. They found that he had a long history of controlling behavior, especially toward the women in his life. His first wife, Elizabeth Broomkeel, had died under questionable circumstances years earlier. That case, though officially ruled an accident, suddenly looked more suspicious. The pattern was too familiar: a wife under his control, a supposed accident, and now another dead spouse. Detectives quietly consulted old reports, comparing details and looking for anything that might reveal a consistent method or motive. The motive, as it turned out, was money and power. Investigators uncovered several life insurance policies Lynn had taken out on Diana, totaling over $1 million. He was listed as the sole beneficiary. These policies had been arranged over a span of years, even as their relationship deteriorated. To the police, it was now clear: Lynn Keel had built a plan that would give him financial gain at the cost of his wife's life. Friends and co-workers were stunned by the revelations. At the hospital where Diana worked, her colleagues described her as kind-hearted and passionate about helping others. They said she loved her children deeply and had been trying to give them a better future. The thought that her husband, the man she had once trusted, could have done this was almost impossible for them to grasp. As the case moved forward, the prosecution gathered a mountain of evidence. They had cell phone data placing Lynn near the dumping site around the time of the murder, tire tracks matching his truck, and surveillance footage showing his vehicle traveling toward the area. Forensic evidence tied the materials used to conceal Diana's body back to his home. Every lead, every trace pointed straight at him. But there was another side to this story that investigators couldn't ignore: the psychological pattern. Interviews with friends, family, and even past acquaintances revealed that Lynn had always been a man who needed to dominate. He controlled money, decisions, and even the smallest aspects of daily life. Diana had slowly been breaking free of that control, a move that, to him, was unthinkable. Detectives pieced together what they believed happened on the day Diana died. After a heated argument, Lynn likely attacked her inside the house. What started as anger turned into fatal violence. Realizing what he had done, he tried to cover it up. He wrapped her body in a tarp, loaded it into his truck, and drove 30 miles away to dump it in a secluded rural area. He then returned home and cleaned up, hoping no one would notice. For a few days he succeeded, until her co-workers raised the alarm. Once arrested, Lynn remained mostly silent. He did not confess, nor did he show emotion. He simply denied wrongdoing, telling detectives that Diana had left home and he didn't know where she went. But his calm demeanor now worked against him. Investigators described it as cold and detached, a sign of someone who had already accepted what he had done. Public interest in the case grew rapidly. News networks followed every development, calling it the Diana Keel murder, trucker, money, and a missing wife. Social media lit up with outrage and sadness. Many people pointed out that signs of abuse had been present for years, that perhaps if those signs had been recognized earlier, Diana's fate could have been different. Domestic violence organizations used her case as an example of how hidden control can escalate into tragedy. Behind the scenes, prosecutors were preparing for a long legal process. They had a strong case, but knew that trials in such situations could be unpredictable. Lynn's defense team began working quietly, reviewing evidence and considering possible strategies. There was speculation that they might push for a plea deal to avoid the death penalty. For Diana's family, the weeks that followed were filled with grief and disbelief. Her mother, who lived in another state, traveled to North Carolina to attend court hearings. She told reporters, all she wanted was peace. She didn't deserve this. Her words echoed what many in the community felt, that Diana's life had been stolen not just by violence, but by betrayal. As the legal process advanced, the investigation into Lynn's first wife's death continued in the background. Although the case could not be officially reopened, the similarities between the two incidents became a dark shadow over his name. It reinforced the idea that this was not a single impulsive act, but part of a longer, more disturbing pattern. By late 2019, with the evidence fully compiled, the district attorney's office prepared to move forward with formal charges of first-degree murder. The prosecution was ready to show that Lynn Keel had not only killed his wife, but had planned it for financial gain. The defense prepared to argue otherwise, hoping to portray it as a tragic argument gone wrong. But even as legal teams worked, one truth remained unshaken. Diana's story had already reached far beyond the courtroom. It had become a symbol of hidden abuse, of a woman trying to reclaim her freedom, and of a system that often only sees the warning signs too late. In Nash County, her memory lived on in the people she had helped as a nurse, in her children who would grow up hearing about her kindness, and in the quiet reminder that even the most ordinary homes can hide the darkest secrets. The stage was now set for the final chapter, the courtroom, the plea, and the long-awaited justice that would close the case of Diana Keel. Rexford Lynn Keel Jr. was brought back to Nash County in handcuffs, under tight security. The man who had once lived a quiet life as a truck driver was now the face of a shocking murder case that had captured national attention. As he walked into the courthouse, reporters lined the steps, their cameras flashing. But Rex, expressionless and calm, said nothing. The same man who had once claimed his wife simply went missing was now accused of her brutal death, and the world wanted answers. Inside the courtroom, the prosecution began piecing together the story of what had happened behind the closed doors of the Keel home. They described a marriage built on control and fear. Witnesses, including neighbors, friends, and colleagues, spoke about how Diana had slowly changed over time. She had become quieter, more anxious, and more withdrawn. The woman who once greeted everyone with a smile had begun to look over her shoulder, as though something or someone constantly frightened her. The prosecution argued that the motive behind Diana's murder was financial gain mixed with dominance. Evidence showed that Rex had taken out over $1 million in life insurance policies on his wife. Not one, but several. Each made him the sole beneficiary. Investigators testified that he had also searched for routes to Mexico online days before her death, an indication that he had been planning both the crime and his escape. Then came the forensic evidence. Blood traces found in the couple's kitchen, garage, and truck matched Diana's DNA. Detectives described how they found cleaning supplies used recently, and a section of carpet missing near the doorway. Experts testified that the pattern of the blood spatter indicated a violent struggle had occurred inside the house, contradicting Rex's initial claim that his wife had left home peacefully. When the medical examiner took the stand, the courtroom fell silent. The autopsy revealed multiple blunt force injuries to Diana's head and body, injuries consistent with being beaten. Though the prosecution refrained from showing any graphic details, their tone was firm. The message was clear. Diana didn't die by accident. She was killed intentionally and with rage. Throughout the trial, Rex's demeanor hardly changed. He sat motionless, eyes fixed forward, rarely looking at anyone. His defense team argued that the evidence was circumstantial, suggesting that there was no eyewitness to the actual crime. They tried to hint that perhaps someone else had harmed Diana after she left home, but their theory failed to hold up. Every piece of physical evidence pointed back to Rex. One of the key emotional moments came when Diana's daughter, from a previous relationship, took the stand. Fighting back tears, she described how her mother had once told her, "If something ever happens to me, look at Rex first." Her words echoed through the courtroom, leaving a deep impression on everyone present. Outside the courthouse, people gathered daily, holding signs demanding justice for Diana. Local news channels followed every update, and the story spread across the country. For many, Diana's case became a symbol of how domestic abuse can hide behind the image of a perfect marriage, and how silence can turn deadly. As the trial neared its conclusion, the weight of evidence became undeniable. Before the jury could reach a verdict, Rexford Linkeel Jr. made a decision. In a surprise move, he entered a plea of no contest, not admitting guilt, but not fighting the charges either. It was a legal strategy that allowed him to avoid a possible death penalty while still facing a severe sentence. In the sentencing hearing, the judge spoke directly to Rex. His tone was measured but firm. He described Diana's death as a senseless act born of greed and control. The courtroom listened as the judge outlined how Rex had betrayed not only his wife's trust, but also the community's belief in safety within their homes. Then came the final words that sealed his fate. Rexford Linkeel Jr. was sentenced to decades in prison. As the gavel struck, silence filled the room. Some of Diana's friends wept quietly. Others simply sat still, knowing that justice, though delayed, had finally arrived. Outside, reporters broadcasted the news. The man who once pretended to search for his missing wife would now spend the rest of his life behind bars. In the months following the trial, Diana's memory continued to live on in the people who had known her. Her colleagues at the hospital organized a memorial garden in her honor, a place filled with her favorite flowers, where staff could sit and reflect. Her church community created an awareness program about domestic violence, hoping to help others recognize warning signs before it was too late. Meanwhile, investigators revisited the mysterious death of Rex's first wife, Elizabeth Keel. Though her case was decades old, authorities reviewed the old files, wondering if the same man who had taken Diana's life might have also been responsible for Elizabeth's unexplained death. While no official charges were filed, the suspicions remained deep and troubling. For law enforcement, the case of Diana Keel became more than just a homicide file. It was a painful reminder that some crimes begin long before the act itself, in moments of control, silence, and fear that go unnoticed by others. Detectives later admitted that the image of Diana's face stayed with them, not as a victim, but as a person whose story demanded to be told. Over time, the Keel home was sold, and new residents moved in. Yet locals say that even years later, the small town of Nash County never truly forgot what happened there. The road where Diana's body was found is still quiet and empty, surrounded by fields and wind, but for many, it carries a lingering heaviness, a reminder of what was lost. The story of Diana Alejandra Keel isn't just about one woman's tragic death. It's about a system that finally listened, a community that refused to stay silent, and investigators who followed the truth until it led them to justice. In the end, the tragedy of the missing wife became a cautionary tale. Behind the facade of a normal marriage lay a storm of control, greed, and manipulation. And while Diana's life ended too soon, her case served as a voice for countless others who live in silence, teaching that love without respect can quickly turn into danger, and that justice, though slow, always finds its way. As the years pass, people in Nash County still remember her name, not just as a victim, but as a woman whose story forced everyone to see the reality behind closed doors. And somewhere, amid the quiet hum of that North Carolina town, her memory endures, a symbol of strength, truth, and the fight for justice that should never be forgotten.